Have you seen the viral TikToks, YouTube videos, Instagram reels about PMS and PMDD and using antihistamines to treat it? If you haven't, there are all these viral videos going around about using antihistamines like Claritin or Zyrtec, and then H2 blockers like Pepcid to treat PMS and PMDD. And honestly, it's working. I mean, people are posting it, people are sharing it with their friends. This actually came up with one of my patients recently. So today we're going to talk about why this is working and actually what it might be telling you about your health and about your body, about your hormones, if this is something that you've tried and it's working for you. And maybe if you haven't tried, but you're thinking, gosh, I need to get on this trend, I'm going to give you some clues, some things that you want to consider before diving in. This is Her Genetic Edge with Lori Aikman, a podcast helping women make sense of hormones, genetics, and the midlife transition through practical conversations around health. This podcast is for educational purposes only and is not intended to replace medical advice. Please consult your healthcare provider before making changes to your care. So, PMS. I'm going to be honest. I wasn't always compassionate or understanding about PMS. I grew up in a family. My dad's side of the family was very stoic, very doesn't show a lot of emotions. Handle yourself. There's not room for big emotions and things like that. Very German, stoic family. Where my mom's side also, a lot of same background, but we're all a family of migraine sufferers. I've had migraines for 20 years and it's just something we've dealt with. And I've gone to work or gone to school or done what I've had to do, even though I'm suffering with a migraine. And so I didn't have compassion or understanding necessarily for PMS and looked at it and kind of judged it, even as a clinician later in life, as somebody being emotional or somebody being more dramatic. In fact, I can think of when I was in middle school and started my period and I had friends, that was like a thing, we're talking about like, oh my gosh, and bras and all that stuff when all you're coming of age. But I remember a friend staying home from school when she was on her period. I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, like, wow, she had to stay home and just not really understanding that. But I would say maybe the first time where I experienced big emotional swings and feeling very out of control is when I experienced baby blues after my first pregnancy. So my oldest child I had in 2021, and I definitely experienced baby blues with him. And I remember that feeling very emotional, but it not just feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm so worked up or I'm so dramatic. It just felt very like all of a sudden I'm crying and I don't know why I'm crying. Or, that if you've been there, right, the intrusive thoughts that start coming in. But that was the first time where I maybe really recognized like, oh, wow, I am feeling, that way that maybe other women experience. But then looking back in my life, I could think of other times where I did experience some definitely big mood swings or that I can look back and see that there were hormonal shifts going on that contributed to how I was feeling emotionally at that time. And then in practice as a nurse practitioner, probably in about 2018, 19 is when I really started seeing the patterns like this showing up in my patients. Prior to that, I had worked in the hospital setting, so I wasn't necessarily working with women with symptoms like this. But then when I transitioned into primary care, I was seeing these patterns show up where women would, really experiencing PMS, PMDD, things like that. And I started to see the pattern coming up again and again and realizing that there was more, it was more than just these women being really emotional, right? It was more than just these women being dramatic. So before I even dive into this episode, I just want to take a moment to say, if you have felt dismissed or shamed or judged by a healthcare provider, by a friend, by a family member, maybe you have even judged yourself and felt like it's your fault and you should be able to change when you haven't been able to. Like, I just want to apologize and I just want you to be able to maybe let that shame and that guilt or that judgment on yourself go. Because we're going to talk about today things that are going on physiologically in your body that can contribute to those symptoms. And maybe if you've never recognized those before, this will be a light bulb moment where you can realize it's not just all you and there is something really physical going on in your body that can be fixed. Okay. All right. So let's dive in. So how this all started, how this story came up is I had a patient come to me and she told me about the videos that were going viral. She's like, my friend showed me this video, these viral things going on, and I'm taking antihistamine before my period. I tried it out because my PMS is just so bad. And it worked. I did it the first month, last month, and I just didn't have those big mood swings and that bad PMS like I normally do. And she was like, for the love of my family, like, can I continue this? Is it working? Is it safe? Just wanting to make sure, like, hey, is this a good thing that I'm doing before she continued to move forward and do it long term? So I want to talk about, okay, what was going on? Why is it working? What might be going on in you if you're experiencing this? And just some other things that you should be considering if you're experiencing these symptoms. So before we dive in, we just have to do a little background on what's happening normally in a cycle. And today there's a lot of hormones involved, but today I'm going to just talk about estrogen and progesterone. So something to note is early in your cycle. So if we talk about a normal cycle, an average 28-day cycle that happens over a month, right? The beginning of your cycle starts when you have a full first day of your period. So that first day of bleeding is considered day 1 of your cycle. So you have your period and then you enter what's called the follicular phase. So essentially your ovary stimulates the production of a follicle and you have an increase, you have a little rise and then fall of estrogen. So you do have a little estrogen peak early in the cycle. That estrogen comes back down. And then when you ovulate, so which means your ovary releases that egg, you enter what's then called the luteal phase. And ideally you have an increase. So we had our estrogen in the first part of the cycle. Then the second part of the cycle, we have an increase in estrogen and progesterone. That's when things are going normally. But what you need to know, how does this related to histamine? Well, histamine is released from something called your mast cells. So these are cells that are part of your inflammatory response. So if mast cells are activated, maybe seasonally when pollen's really bad, you might have mast cell activation and histamine release. People usually think of histamine as causing like runny nose and congestion and sneezing and things like that. But estrogen actually makes it easier for those mast cells to release histamine. So it actually lowers the threshold for histamine to be released from those mast cells. Then counter to that, we have progesterone. Progesterone actually helps to stabilize the mast cell. So to keep it from releasing histamine. So if we think about just estrogen, progesterone in relation to histamine, estrogen is kind of like pushing the gas and progesterone is kind of like pushing the brake. And so when we have a nice balance of estrogen and progesterone, we ideally don't have those histamine symptoms. But it's when the estrogen and progesterone are not balanced is where we can start to have some problems. How then is histamine related to PMS symptoms? Why does antihistamines make PMS symptoms better? So histamine is not just related to runny nose and sneezing and coughing and things like that, the allergy symptoms you may think of. Histamine also can be excitatory in the brain. So histamine can cause anxiety, irritability, and just being emotionally more reactive. But that's histamine's effect in the brain. But histamine also plays a role in the gut. So when we have increased histamine in the gut, we can have bloating, we can maybe have looser stools, we can have some cramping, digestive issues. So you might have experienced that. You might be somebody who experiences that during your time leading up to your period, where you might experience some digestive changes leading up to that cycle. And histamine is what's going on. Histamine is what's triggering those things. Another thing that histamine can contribute to, also related to the brain, is things like like headaches and migraines. I know I've experienced that personally. When I've had a migraine, I've also had kind of feeling like I'm having a runny nose or stuffiness over on the same side that that migraine is happening. And that can be related to histamine and not just from the hormones. So we know about the symptoms, but it's the imbalance of the hormones sometimes that can create these histamine symptoms. So, just easy illustration I do with a lot of my patients. So I put my hands up like this. So if you're watching this video, if I, in an ideal scenario, we have a balance of estrogen and progesterone. Progesterone comes from when we ovulate. And when we don't have good quality ovulation, we can have lower progesterone. So this initially we started off estrogen and progesterone balance, but then we have a cycle where we have low progesterone. We have that imbalance of estrogen and progesterone. And remember, estrogen was that gas pedal, pressing the gas pedal on histamine, where progesterone was the brake. We don't have enough brake compared to the gas, right? Just simplistic way to say it. But then what else can happen is we can have increased production of estrogen, and we can also just have more estrogen around because it's not getting cleared as well. I see that very, very commonly in the women that I work with in my practice, is their estrogen doesn't get cleared well. So essentially we get a situation of estrogen dominance or estrogen excess. So that would be, okay, we've got more estrogen than progesterone. And you might have guessed this already, but then we can have both those scenarios. We can have more estrogen around and less progesterone, which again creates that big discrepancy between the estrogen and progesterone. So this is where our histamine symptoms can come into play. And the thing it makes me think of is not just our younger ladies, like maybe ladies that are in their 30s, but especially if you're a woman in perimenopause, say in your 40s, or possibly even early 50s, you might be experiencing this because you're having that drop in progesterone just from the natural age and stage of life of being in perimenopause. So it can show up in different stages of life, those same types of symptoms. The thing is, there's kind of a feedback loop that will essentially keep this cycle going. So again, when we have too much estrogen, it's going to stimulate that histamine release more. But then the thing is, estrogen also downregulates two enzymes that help break down histamine. So your body has a breakdown and clear histamine, and there's two enzymes that do that, the DAO enzyme, which is diamine oxidase, and then HNMT, which is histamine N-methyltransferase. So again, estrogen is going to downregulate those enzymes. So not only do we have histamine relief from the estrogen, but then the estrogen also keeps that histamine from being cleared as efficiently. And another weird part of that is that histamine can then indirectly cause more estrogen production. So it's just this kind of vicious cycle. But again, progesterone is like our braking system. Not only does progesterone help stabilize that mast cell and keep it from releasing more histamine, but progesterone also upregulates or makes that DAO enzyme more active. So again, it's going to keep those mast cells from releasing histamine as much, and then it's going to help that DAO enzyme clear histamine more. So of course, we've got to cover where genetics come in. So there's two genes that play a role in histamine, and they're related to those two enzymes. You have a DAO gene, which controls how well that DAO enzyme works. You have a couple different variants of DAO, but essentially some people can have a genetic variation that makes their DAO enzyme work less efficiently. So even if you took aside hormone imbalance, if you just genetically, your DAO enzyme doesn't work as well, then you add on hormone balance on top of that. It's like a double whammy. Then adding to it, there's genetic variants that affect that HNMT enzyme. So there's some people who genetically, I'm one of these, I have a variant that makes my HNMT enzyme not work as efficiently. If you have HNMT genes that don't clear histamine well, you have DAO genes that affect, you make you not clear histamine well, then you have hormone balance on top of that, then it just creates this like just prime environment for these really, severe histamine symptoms. So in my patient, I talked about the 34-year-old, this showed up like PMS and PMDD in her. But I've also seen this in women in perimenopause. It show up in a different way. So I had another patient who's probably about 10 years older. Let's say she was in her mid 40s. She came to me a year or two ago, and she was experiencing severe swelling. So age and stage, I was like, okay, you're in perimenopause. You're just in that stage of life where, hormones are dropping. I believe she even did have some hormone testing already from another doctor, which did show lower progesterone. But how this was showing up in her is she would wake up in the morning and she would have swelling. I mean, it would look like she probably ate something she was allergic to. She sent me pictures. Her nose would be swollen, her lips would be swollen, her face just looked really puffy. And this was a woman who exercised and ate healthy. She works in the healthcare field, right? And so she's going, what the heck is going on? And at that time, I was not doing genetics with my patients as heavily, so I did not have genetic testing on her. But knowing what I know now, I would guess she likely had variations in DAO and maybe HNMT as well that made her more susceptible. So when that progesterone really dropped in perimenopause, she started having all this swelling. The other thing that happened was that she was also having high blood pressure. She had never had problems with blood pressure before, and all of a sudden she was experiencing high blood pressure. Interesting thing, when we just started putting her on progesterone, we just started supplementing progesterone, her swelling started decreasing and her blood pressure also started decreasing. And that's because, again, like we talked through, we were helping to bring that balance of estrogen and progesterone back in. And remember that progesterone was going to help to stabilize those mast cells, keeping them from releasing histamine, and then is going to make that DAO enzyme work better and help break down histamines and clear them more efficiently. So this genetic variance is why even sisters could have different experiences. Maybe you have two girls in a family that are sisters, right? One has PMDD and another does not. Of course, there's other gene variations that affect clearance of neurotransmitters and stuff that can be playing a role with PMDD. I'm not saying it's DAO or HNMT alone, but if we look just at those two genes, you can have one sister with certain DAO and HNMT variants and then another sister with different variants. And so how they're going to experience, let's say perimenopause, for example, is going to be different because of how their genetics then affect those enzymes. So let's go back to the viral videos. Why are these antihistamines, why is Pepcid actually working and helping PMS and PMDD? So medications like Zyrtec and Claritin, these are what we call H1 blockers. So there's two different types of histamine receptors, and it's going to affect the H1 blockers. So it's going to keep histamine from being able to combine with that receptor. And then H2 blockers are medications like Pepcid or famotidine are H2 blockers. So when we take those medications, they block the receptor on the cell where histamine is going to come and connect. So they help with the symptoms because they're blocking the histamine receptor. But the thing is, histamine is still there, right? We've got to then break down and clear histamine. So this is where I would suggest a root cause approach. Yes, I'm not saying don't do those or whatever. You have to make your decision with your doctor based on your body. But again, when we look at a root cause, we want to look at, okay, well, why are we having problems with histamine? What is going on in the body? And let's actually address that rather than just treating the symptoms with the histamine blockers when it's not really taking care of the histamine itself. So again, like my second patient I told you about, my patient that was in her 40s, definitely in perimenopause, again, when we treated the hormone imbalance that was really triggering her symptoms started to clear. The same thing actually happened in the younger patient who was 34. She had had multiple hormone tests done. She did one with me, and then she had had two different hormone tests with her previous provider, where we actually saw 2 out of 3 of the hormone tests she had very low progesterone, which looked like she was not ovulating. So she's under a lot of stress because of her job. It's likely keeping her from ovulating. We're looking at other things. Of course, we want to rule out other causes, but in her, it's looking like stress is a big contributor in keeping her from ovulating. So we're going to look at one, we can go ahead and bring progesterone in to help with that hormone imbalance and help with those histamine symptoms and balance that progesterone back out. But we want to make sure, okay, why is she having low progesterone? And like we talked about before, that imbalance, we want to make sure she's clearing her estrogen well. If her estrogen is building up, right, because she's not clearing it well, we've got to address that as well. So if you're experiencing this, if you're experiencing PMS, PMDD, maybe you've done the antihistamines and you're like, yeah, it's working. Like, what are some things that you could do to address what's going on in your body and start to feel like yourself again? So one, you want to address that hormone imbalance first. That's what we did with both of these patients. We could see that they both had low progesterone. So they both had, not enough progesterone to help balance out that estrogen, which is why they were having the problem with the histamine. So with both of them, we brought progesterone in to help bring that balance back up. But then the other thing we've got to do is look at, okay, well, why are they having that low progesterone? Is it just perimenopause and the age and stage of life? In my younger patient, I would expect her to be having good ovulation. So we had to dive a little deeper and see, okay, why aren't you ovulating regularly? Is there, is it high stress? Is it nutrition? Are there nutritional deficiencies like contributing to that, right? So we're going to cover all of those bases and make sure, right, try to get her body ovulating on its own and producing good amounts of progesterone on its own. But we can also bring that progesterone in and while we're doing that in order to help with her symptoms. So you can bring that progesterone up, but then we also want to make sure, again, are they clearing their estrogen well? Are they having that imbalance of estrogen and progesterone because they're not clearing their estrogen well? So we want to look at estrogen detoxification, estrogen metabolism, and make sure that's operating well. So once those things are addressed and hormones are balanced, then we could look at genetics if your symptoms are persisting. So you're like, no, my estrogen, progesterone are balanced. I'm great there. Hormones look good. I'm still having these histamine symptoms. The next step I would recommend would be looking into some of these genetic variants. Do you maybe have these variants in the DAO enzyme? Do you have variants that affect the DAO enzyme and the HNMT enzyme that are making you more susceptible to histamine? And one thing I want to point out, this happens in me as well. I have a variant that affects my HNMT. And I didn't necessarily identify with high histamine symptoms. I didn't have swelling or things like that. I wouldn't say I had a lot of PMS or PMDD. But what I do have is migraines. And sometimes when I have migraines, typically have left-sided migraines that are left frontal. Sometimes I'll experience tearing up of my ear, running of my nose, or even feeling like my nose is kind of congested. And this was something that I literally didn't put together until within the last year, realizing, oh, this is histamine related. But I can look back and even recognize when I've had digestive upset in that time leading up to my period, which again is histamine related. So you can look at your genetics and see, okay, are you more susceptible to these changes because of your genes? Then the other thing would be then it's not wrong to use the antihistamines or something like a DAO enzyme. There are a lot of great products. I particularly like, I'm not an affiliate. This is no endorsement for financial means, but I do love Dr. Ben Lynch's company. He's the one that wrote Dirty Genes. He has the supplement company Seeking Health, and they've got a lot of great histamine supplements, histamine nutrients, histamine X. There are probiotics that can help with breaking down of histamine. And so using something like that can also help, along with removing high histamine foods from your diet, making sure you're not eating foods that are left over for too long, because that can increase the levels of histamine in the foods. So that it's a multi-step approach, right? And again, that's why maybe just using those antihistamines, yes, it's controlling the symptoms, but it's not really a root cause solution. So if you are somebody who does struggle with PMS or PMDD, or maybe you're in perimenopause and you're like, why is my body seem to be reacting differently than everybody else, right? Everybody else is experiencing this, but I'm experiencing this. What I invite you to do is just subscribe to the Her Genetic Edge podcast today. If this was valuable for you, if you're now learning, okay, there might be some things going on, some genetic variants that are affecting the experience I'm having in my body, stay tuned here on the podcast for more episodes just like this. You can subscribe on any of the podcast platforms, but I would invite you to subscribe on Substack, specifically because we are coming out with other resources, workshops, masterclasses that you can join in on, so that you can get the help that you need that maybe you're not getting from your doctor or your provider right now. So when you subscribe on Substack, you'll get notification of all those upcoming things that we're doing. You can be a free subscriber. You just go to laurieaikman.com. That takes you right to our Her Genetic Edge Substack, and you can subscribe right from there. All right. I hope you loved this episode. I will see you next week.